I'm here to talk to you about something that many of you have experienced. And this is moving from one country to another. This happened to me, as well as it's happened to you, and as well as it will continue happening to a lot of us. When I was 8 years old, my dad approached us at the dinner table. My family and I were sitting together, as we used to do. And he said to us, "Family, I have great news. We are moving to the United States of America." I lived in Lima, Peru, my hometown. And the whole family was super excited. It turned out that my dad had won a scholarship to earn his PhD. And the scholarship paid for him, his studies, and our family to move all the way to the United States. And as an 8-year-old, I was so excited. American candy. I didn't care that the only words that I knew in English were snowman, yellow, pencil, yes, and no. Because I was going to the United States. It didn't matter that I was going to Fargo, North Dakota, in the middle of the North American continent, very close to Canada. Nobody ever goes to Fargo, North Dakota. I was going to the United States, so excited. It turned out that my dad had to leave 6 months earlier just to set up home and make sure that we were all settled in when we came to join him. And that's one of the things that I still value to this day, that when my mom, my brother, and I met back up with him, it was April 27, 1984. And since that day, April 27, is our family day. Wherever we are in the world now, our family makes a point to call each other. Happy Family Day, we say. That's one of the many traditions, or just something that happened because of that move that we experienced together. Well, once I arrived, the obvious difficulty that presented to me in the face was the language barrier. I didn't know how to speak English. But I didn't care. I was in the United States. I was going to go to my school. My parents enrolled me in the public school that was around the neighborhood. And on my first day, I was terrified. I didn't understand anything that was going on around me. And that's one thing that I really remember, because the fear that I felt, the uncertainty, the not knowing what was going on, all I could do, it's almost like I had lost one of my senses, because I could not understand what people were saying. All I could do was observe and try to make out from their actions, their gestures, what it is that was happening. It was good that I was familiar with the school environment, because I knew more or less the things that happened, even though this school was very different from mine in Peru. But I was so excited anyway that I tried to make the best out of the situation. I remember one particular story that happened to me where I was so nervous and so frustrated. I had forgotten my pencil at home. I felt so unprepared, and I didn't have the words to be able to tell my classmates that I had forgotten a pencil and that I needed to borrow a pencil. But I knew the word pencil, and I knew the word two. So I went up to each of my classmates and said, "Two pencil? Two pencil? Two pencil?" But I didn't think that I wouldn't understand their response. They were saying something to me. They were not showing me another pencil that I could grab. They were probably trying to understand what it is that I was trying to say to them. And that feeling of frustration and the lack of being able to express myself is something that I still remember to this day. Well, that was one of the experiences that was not so funny, I guess. I don't know what happened. I remember that my whole break time, I tried to get this pencil and I did not succeed, and I was just very sad and a little bit mad. But it wasn't the end of the world, so it was fine. But then as I started to get more knowledge of English and more vocabulary words, the school did provide an EAL teacher. And that teacher pulled me out of class, showed me a few words in English because she didn't speak any Spanish. As I started to learn more English, I felt bolder. I'm like, yes, I'm gonna try to change things up a little bit. Because I had noticed that at the beginning of the day, when the teacher took attendance, she would say every student's name. The students wouldn't say here or present. They would say hot or cold. And I didn't understand what that meant. I'm like, why? So when she got to my name, I was in my brain trying to find out some sort of pattern. Maybe the boys were one word and the girls were another. I couldn't really grasp this pattern. So when she got to my name, I didn't know what to say. And I just chose cold. Because I just had to choose one. And she seemed okay with that. She wrote in her clipboard, left. But every morning it was the same thing. And every morning I knew that if I said cold, it was going to be okay. But like I said, this was probably about the third week of school, and I was feeling a little bit bolder, so I decided to change my answer. I decided that I would go with hot. And I was very excited to try what would happen. So attendance came, the teacher came to the classroom. Susana, hot. She looked at me, and I knew right away with her body language that I had done something that she wasn't expecting. And it was right, because I always said cold. So she looked at me again and she said, Susana, hot? And I said, yes, hot. Okay, she wrote it in her clipboard and left. The rest of the morning, the school day went as usual. Nothing else happened until it was time for lunch in the cafeteria. I was eating my lunch, and that same teacher approached me, and she pointed at my sandwich that my mom had made, and she said, Susana, you said hot. And I said, yeah, I'm hot. She said, no, you have a cold lunch. Hot is when you eat in the cafeteria. So with this story, I realized how this new culture worked. In my old school in Peru, we didn't have a cafeteria. We all brought our lunches, and it was necessary for the school at the beginning of the day to know how many lunches to prepare. So they needed to know how many hot lunches they had to make. I had no idea about that. But it was through these little experiments with language that I realized about the world around me, about this new culture that I became part of. And speaking of becoming part of, one thing that really made a difference in my adaptation to my new home was belonging to a group. For me at that time was the Girl Scouts. Belonging to the Girl Scouts gave me a sense of, yes, I'm accepted, I'm okay here, I am important, I have a role in this small community. One other thing that, looking back, really helped the acquisition of English for me, knowing, as you have heard, that I knew very little words, was that I was an avid reader. And curiously, I didn't know that I liked reading until I arrived in the United States and I saw the library. Such a beautiful place filled with books and all these wonderful colors and pictures, and the librarian was so nice. She received me, she showed me all these picture books that I could access that were not so hard in the English level, but they were very helpful with the pictures. I could put them together, make stories. And many times the library, I went there for refuge. I couldn't communicate very well with my classmates, so I would go there and just kind of hide a little behind the books. But at the same time that I was doing that, I was learning English. And I was really happy to read out loud to anyone who would listen. Because people would always say, oh, you're such a good reader. And a lot of times I didn't even understand what I was reading. But just having that recognition of, wow, your English is really improving, when I had even no understanding of the words that I was saying, really helped. So kind of recapping or summarizing, these are the takeaways that I had moving into a new country that perhaps you can relate to. Is the first one is when I moved to a new country, how it's important to take risks. Observe what people are doing and see how they behave as a way to understand the new culture. Another one is how important it is to feel included and to have those social structures for support. And the third one, which I've mentioned, is how important reading is for language acquisition. As an English teacher now, my students know how much I value that. And even though they might say, I don't like reading, I like to have them rephrase that with, I don't like reading yet. I didn't know that I liked reading either. The time came when my dad said to us, family, this happened after 3 years of living in the States, we're going back home. So, sadly, I loved my life in the United States. Sadly, it was time to go back, but at the same time, very exciting. My family were there, my friends, I was going back to my old school. So, we did. But, first big shock. Peru, at that time, the year was 1987, was in a state of emergency. The whole country was in a civil war. Terrorism was at its height. And there was a curfew. You couldn't leave your house after 10 p.m. or you would be shot by the military. That curfew lasted until 6 in the morning. Inflation was over the roof. And just the political situation of the country was so much different than when I had left it. But one thing that I also noticed is that not only had the country changed, I had also changed. This is a picture of me and my brother in the United States. And I put it there because it shows the contrast of our life in the States with my new life in Peru, well, going back to my old life. You can see the bicycles in the background. Oftentimes we would leave them there, and they would be still there the next day. And we were going back to this country, or I found myself back in Peru, where I couldn't leave the house after 10. Nobody could. This made me wonder as well, whoa, who am I now? I'm back in this country that is my own, but I don't feel like I belong here. I want to go back to the States. It was so much nicer there. People were nicer. People said hi to you on the streets, even if they didn't know you. And now here in this country, we can't just leave our bicycles by the side of our house because they're going to get stolen. So seeing my country so different and me back in my country also made me question my identity. Although you could argue that I was in middle school now, and those are questions that happen in the middle school age as well, right? Who am I? But one thing that became really apparent for me, and very surprising for me, is that after 3 years of speaking English, I could no longer speak Spanish the way I used to. I went to school in Spanish. It was my old school, my old teachers, my old classmates. And it was hard for me to say things in Spanish because I had not spoken Spanish for so long. With my brother and my parents, we spoke English at home. They spoke to us in Spanish, but we responded in English because we knew they understood us. Just like my children do with me now. But it was difficult because I didn't have the language anymore. It was there, but it wasn't so accessible. I remember one of my teachers getting really frustrated at me because she was speaking to me and I didn't quite understand what she was saying. She was probably speaking too fast, as Latin Spanish tends to be. And she looked at me and she said, "Susana, do you think in English or in Spanish?" I was completely taken aback by her question because I hadn't thought of that. And I stopped to think, and wow, I was thinking in English. And I told her, "Oh, in English?" And she said, "You better start thinking in Spanish because that's your new language now." Or that's rather your language, your original one. And this link between who I am and the language that I speak was so strong that at one point, probably when I was a little bit older, I thought that if you didn't speak both English and Spanish, you couldn't really understand who I was as a person. And in Peru, most people speak just Spanish. They don't speak such good English as they do here, for example, in Romania, where we find that English speakers are very common. In Peru, you just speak Spanish. So it was very lonely for me to feel that I couldn't connect to another person in that level because my friends only spoke Spanish. But in some ways it made my family become closer, especially with my brother, because my brother was the only person that I could speak in English and in Spanish in that same level. So one of the things just to recap, moving back to a country is unexpectedly difficult. I was ready to move back, to move to the States. I felt excited, I knew things were different, but going back to Peru, I just expected to adapt right away, and everybody did, and it wasn't so easy. So that unexpected difficulty of repatriation became apparent, along with such a close relationship between language and identity. Those are the two lessons that, looking back as an adult, I feel that I've learned when I moved back to Peru. And speaking of adult, I've chosen this life for myself. I'm an international teacher, and I now, by choice, have decided to live all over the world. And it's been great. I love it, because every time I move to a new country, I have the opportunity to think about who I am, think about who I want to be, and I compare it a lot to perhaps New Year's, where you're leaving behind something, celebrating what you're leaving behind, but at the same time celebrating what's coming ahead. And in a way, it's like a rebirth. You have the opportunity to be better, to start afresh, from everything, from the inside and the outside, because everything around you changes as well. So this is my biggest lesson that I've learned, but at the same time, I want you to think for yourself. And this is my challenge to you. How can you find the opportunity that these challenges present us? How can you see these challenges of moving, because we all know how difficult a move can be? How can you find the opportunities in these challenges? And how can you see this as an opportunity to reinvent yourself? Thank you.